Okay, for question 3, there are solutions in the back of the book, and question 3 is very, very similar to question 2, C, I, D, and E. So I would just say to make sure that you use the words about, use complete sentences, and use your curve of best fit to make your estimates. Okay, so if you need some help with it, just send me an email and I can make you a quick video. But I think number 5 is a little bit different, so I'm going to go ahead and do this one. So draw the next 3 frames in the pattern. So here's frame 1, here's frame 2, here's frame 3. So we have to kind of find some type of pattern. I see a few different patterns. I see that we start with 3 at the top, and then we go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares at the top. So it goes from 3 squares at the top to 5 to 7, which means there's a little bit of a pattern there. Okay, so 3 squares at the top, 5, 7. The next one's going to have 9. So I'm just going to do my best to draw this properly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, which means the next one's going to have 11. I'll just do the frame 4 for now. Frame 4 should have a few boxes at the bottom, but we have to check out how many. So frame 1 has 1 right here. Frame 2 has 2. Frame 3 has 3 squares going down. So frame 4 is going to have 4 frames going down. So I'm going to put 4 going down. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that is frame 4. There's different ways of doing this. Some people count all the squares and then go on from frame 4, frame 5, and frame 6. Again, the solutions are in the back of the book. I encourage you to go look where the review is and go check the solutions for that. For each of the 6 frames, record the frame number and the number of squares in a table. So we have to figure out what's going to go in the table. So the frame number is actually going to be your x-axis, and the number of squares is going to be your x-axis or your y-axis. So we'll go ahead and write that down. The frame number is usually always in the x-axis. So we have a table for you right here. So you can write down frame number. And then number of squares can go right here. So when we have frame number 1, if I just go up a little bit, frame number 1 had 1, 2, 3, 4 squares in total. Okay, so 4 squares in total. Frame number 2 had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 squares in total. Frame number 3 had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 squares in total. And by now you should start seeing a pattern here. Okay, notice that it's going up by 3 every time the frame number goes up by 1. So if I go up by 3, the next one should be 13, which is frame 4. Frame 5 is going to be 16, because I'm again just going up by 3. And frame 6 will have 19. Okay, so there's your table of values that they want you to complete. So just remember to have an x-axis, a y-axis, and to have from frames 1 to 6. Okay, so we did that. Describe the trend. So again, the trend are words that you're going to use. You're not going to tell me that it increases by 3 every time. This is not the time to do that. But the trend is using those keywords and telling me as the frame number increases, the number of squares also increases. Okay, so that's what we want for the trend. I don't want anything else. You can just say that as the frame number increases, the number of squares also increase. Do you think the graph will be linear or non-linear? So I'm going to say I think the graph will be linear because, don't forget to explain, because the number of squares goes up at a constant rate. So if something is constant, you're walking at the same speed, you're driving at the same rate, the number of squares is going up by the same amount, it means that it's going to be linear. A straight line means that it's constant. It doesn't change. It's the same the whole time. So here's for question C. I believe for question D, we're just going to have to graph this. not only are we going to have to graph the data, we're going to have to see if the prediction in part C was correct. So I thought it was linear, but let's see if that was correct. So we have to put a couple things on our graph. Okay, and here we're drawing frames. So just going to go back up and see exactly what they're talking about. So I'm going to call this frame patterns, okay, as a title. And we have 6 number of frames, and I have a big graph to fill here. So if I put 0 at the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and scale this by 0.5s again. So 0.5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. My arrow is already there, but I need to make sure that I write down that that's my x-axis, and that is the frame number. Okay, and then number of squares. So the number of squares. The reason the number of squares goes on the y-axis is because the number of squares affects the frame number. Okay, so the more squares I have, the higher my frame number is going to be. So the number of squares, we went up to 19. So let's go up by 2.5s again. So here's 5, 2.5, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. I don't really need to go that high. Okay, so at 1 frame, it was 4 number of squares, there were 4 squares. At 2, it was 7. At 3, so 2.5, okay, 7 would be a little bit lower than that. Okay, so right about here. At 3, it was 10. 4 was 13.5. At 5, it was 16. Okay, hold on, I gotta go back here. At 4, it was 13, so 13 would be a little bit higher than that, right about here. At 5, it was 16, and at 6, it was 19, so right below the 20 here, okay? So there's my graph. I see a pretty clear pattern here. I see that it's increasing. I see that it's positive. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line of best fit going through most of this. Okay, that didn't really work out for me, so I'm just going to go ahead and retry that. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and retry that line. And remember that you want it to go through most points. Okay, it's kind of hard to draw on the computer. I'm going to try one more time and then see what happens here. I'm trying to, again, get it to go through most points. So if I do that, I'm going to try to do that. Okay, so this is as best as I'm going to get it. I'm trying to get it, again, to go through most points, but there we go. That's a bit better. There we go. So there is a good line of best fit. It's going through most points. And because I can put a line of best fit, this means that my relationship is linear. So we're just going to go to the next question. Write a rule for the number of squares in any frame. So if we need to find the number of squares in any frame, we have to go look up here at the pattern. So in this case, we're adding 3 every single time for the number of squares. But that's not going to work if we try this out. So let's say we take the frame number 2. If I add 3, that does not give me 7. 2 plus 3 is actually equal to 5. So adding 3 is not necessarily going to work. So if you remember what Ms. Pardo had taught you, you take the plus 3 and you change it to a times 3. 2 times 3 is actually equal to 6, which still doesn't work because the frame number is 7. So we have to figure out a way to get this equal to 7 by using that 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. And then what can we do to 6 to get to 7? Well, we can add 1. So the general rule here is we multiply the frame number by 3, and then we add 1. So we're going to write that down, and that's question E. So for question E, multiply the frame number by 3, then add 1 to get the number of squares. Okay, this part is kind of difficult, but we're going to go back up and see if it works for others. So we'll use the 4. So 4, let's see, times 3, not plus 3, but times 3. 4 times 3 is 12. And then 12 plus 1, and it actually works, is equal to 13. So this rule works for every single number. Now, we recognize that you could continue your table. So let's say for question F, you want to know how many are in the 8th frame. Well, you could continue this pattern by just doing plus 3. So 19 plus 3 is 22. 21, 22, that's the 7th frame. And the 8th frame would be 25 if you continue the pattern of adding 3 every time. So in the 8th frame, there are 22 squares. Okay, in the 8th frame, there are 22 squares. I used my table of values to find this number. The only problem with that is if you're looking for 28 squares. Now, of course, you could keep your table of values going, but it would take a really long time. So this is where you kind of want to use the rule. So for question G, I would just go for the 28th frame. Okay, remember what we did at the top? We multiplied by 3. And 28 times 3, if you just grab a calculator. Okay. Oops, just trying to pull up a calculator. So we're going to do 28 times 3. Which is 84. That's not the answer though. Remember, we have to add 1 because otherwise the other pattern wouldn't work. So there are 85 squares in the 28th frame, and you have to use a complete sentence again. So there are 85 squares in the 28th frame. Okay. So again, this one's a bit more difficult. Take a look at the rule. I think that would be the hardest part to do, but using your table of values, you're always able to do this without actually using the rule.